Flight attendant targets black woman for random search. Moments later, she conducts a federal audit. They say airports are crossroads of endless journeys, where strangers collide under the fluorescent glow of gate signs and departure boards. Some depart in bliss, while others land in fateful confrontation. On an otherwise typical morning at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, a tense drama unfolds between a flight attendant who believes she's merely exercising authority and a poised black traveler who humbly submits to a random search. Little does the flight attendant realize that her target is no ordinary passenger. She's a high-ranking federal official with the power to conduct an audit that could shake the airline to its core and deliver a dose of hard karma. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, widely known as the world's busiest airport, had come alive before the sun even inched above the horizon. Clusters of travelers navigated from check-in counters to security lines, towing suitcases and juggling cups of coffee. Departure screens flashed gate changes, adding to the general sense of urgency. Among the steady stream of passengers, Valerie Campbell blended in seamlessly. She wore a simple black blazer over a crisp white blouse, paired with comfortable slacks. Her carry-on bag rolled smoothly behind her, filled with documents she needed for a series of federal evaluations she was conducting over the next week. To the casual observer, she looked like an everyday business traveler. Only a keen eye might notice the distinct calm in her demeanor, a quiet confidence that came from years spent enforcing regulations and handling high-stakes audits. In truth, Valerie held an influential position as a senior investigator for the Point US Department of Transportation, specifically assigned to review airline compliance and passenger rights enforcement. She wasn't quite celebrity famous, but those in the aviation industry who handled compliance and audits knew her reputation well. Airlines either dreaded or respected her unflinching approach to oversight. Yet here, in the bustling terminal, she was just another face, waiting to catch her early flight to Washington, D.C., for a debrief on her recent findings. Over at Gate B30, Lena Dawson, a flight attendant with Delta Airlines, sipped her latte as she mentally prepped for a busy day. She prided herself on being thorough, if sometimes a bit rigid. After nearly a decade flying domestic routes, she believed she had a keen sense for unusual situations. That morning, tension radiated through her. The flight was overbooked, the gate agent was frazzled, and there'd already been a minor commotion involving a late-arriving family. As the boarding process began, Lena stationed herself at the entrance to the jet bridge. She made small talk with the gate agent, double-checking passenger boarding passes whenever possible, determined to keep everything under tight control. The small surge of authority she felt whenever she corrected someone's seat assignment or asked them to wait was, to her, part of doing the job right. By the time Valerie Campbell reached the gate area, she hadn't the faintest inkling that her day would take a dramatic turn. Nor did Lena suspect that the unassuming black woman approaching would hold the power to upend her entire professional life. In a matter of minutes, a seemingly routine random search would set the stage for a confrontation that would echo through the airline's corridors for months to come. Valerie approached Gate B30, with time to spare. She'd already cleared security with minimal fuss, though she always endured a twinge of discomfort during TSA screenings, a habit formed from witnessing too many traveler complaints. Having left an early morning phone meeting with her supervisor, she was grateful for a moment to breathe before boarding. In the waiting area, she scanned the overhead screens to confirm her flight details. An announcement crackled over the PAR: Delta Flight 1745 to Washington, D.C. will begin pre-boarding in approximately 5 minutes. Several passengers stirred, collecting their belongings. Valerie took a seat near the gate. She opened an email on her phone, one from a colleague in the enforcement division, referencing upcoming audits on random flights. Ironically, the message reminded her how these audits were always unannounced, giving carriers no time to prepare or alter their routines. She took notes, mentally bookmarking items she'd need for her next meeting. Meanwhile, Lena hovered near the boarding gate, her focus split between the gate agent's announcements and the endless queue of travelers. She was aware that the flight was near capacity, and overbooked flights often led to disgruntled passengers. One eye scanned the crowd, her mind unconsciously assigning categories: frequent flyer, family with kids, potential troublemaker. She believed it was her duty to preempt issues, though sometimes her personal biases snuck into that assessment. Catching a glimpse of Valerie quietly reviewing documents, Lena felt a vague sense of suspicion. Something about the woman's calm demeanor, combined with her taking notes at the gate, struck Lena as odd. Was the passenger a journalist? A competitor from another airline gathering intel? Lena's tension that morning left her primed to see threats where none existed. As if on cue, the gate agent announced the first boarding group premium passengers and those needing assistance. Lena nodded to the travelers in wheelchairs, assisting them kindly as they pre-boarded. She forced a smile through the typical chaos of overhead bin space negotiations and seat reassignments. When the general boarding call began, Valerie's zone was up. She rose, carry-on in hand, and queued with a cluster of business travelers and families. She stepped to the front, offering a polite smile as the gate agent scanned her boarding pass. That was the moment Lena locked eyes with her again. "Ma'am, do you have any additional items besides that carry-on?" Lena asked abruptly, stepping in front of the gate agent. Valerie blinked, momentarily startled. "No, just this bag. Is there a problem?" "We're conducting random searches," Lena said, her tone clipped. "We need to verify that your carry-on meets security guidelines." All around them, passengers nudged forward in curiosity. The gate agent looked puzzled, but said nothing. Valerie's brows furrowed. A random check at the gate? She'd seen it happen before, but typically for obviously oversized luggage or blatant security flags. Hers was a standard carry-on, well within size limits. Still, she offered no resistance. "Of course," she said quietly. "Let me step aside." The stage was set. Lena, caught in her own web of assumptions, believed she was ensuring flight safety. Valerie, unsuspecting of the deeper prejudice at play, complied with stoic calm. Neither knew that in a matter of hours, their roles would invert in a dramatic fashion, one that would leave Lena facing the very kind of scrutiny she had so freely imposed on others. Lena gestured for Valerie to follow her a few steps away from the boarding line, toward a small, roped-off area used for last-minute bag checks. A father, traveling with 2 young children, paused to watch, while the gate agent awkwardly tried to keep the flow of passengers moving. Murmurs spread quickly. "Why her? What's happening?" Valerie set her carry-on on a metal table, unzipping it as Lena slipped on a pair of latex gloves. She glanced up at Lena, maintaining a neutral expression. "You'll find a laptop in the front pocket, some clothing and paperwork. Nothing out of the ordinary." Lena rifled through the bag methodically, her brow creased in concentration. Each item she pulled out was meticulously inspected: a neatly folded blouse, a toiletries kit well within TSA limits, sealed files with official letterheads that read US, Department of Transportation. "Are you traveling for work?" Lena asked, eyes flicking across the documents. Her tone had an edge, betraying a hint of suspicion that had yet to abate. "I am," Valerie replied simply. She kept her job title vague, not wanting to escalate the situation prematurely. Lena lingered a second too long on the official letterhead, a subtle sign that she was trying to decipher some hidden meaning. Then she moved on, checking a few more items. The search took longer than most, which didn't go unnoticed by nearby passengers. Finally, she zipped the bag closed. "Your bag is cleared," Lena announced. Then, as if an afterthought, she added, "Would you also mind stepping through an extra security wanding?" Valerie frowned slightly. This level of screening was beyond typical gate procedures, especially after she'd already passed the standard TSA checkpoint. Still, she suppressed her irritation. "Sure," she said calmly. Grabbing a handheld metal detector, Lena motioned for Valerie to stand with arms extended. A quick pass from top to bottom confirmed no hidden metal objects. Lena's expression remained unreadable. "All right," Lena said, slipping off the gloves. "You can board now." Valerie nodded, reclaiming her belongings. She noticed how the travelers behind her shuffled uncomfortably, likely wondering if they'd be targeted next. Some shot Valerie sympathetic glances, as if they sensed something was off. Returning to the main boarding line, Valerie tried to push aside the gnawing feeling that this wasn't a mere random search. In her experience, random checks at the gate were typically triggered by an actual reason, irregularities in a passenger's travel record, or major overpacking concerns. Her bag had been thoroughly scanned by TSA, and nothing about her should have stood out that morning. Could it be racial bias? The thought left a bitter taste in her mouth. Boarding the aircraft, she resolved to keep her composure. She wasn't the type to jump to conclusions without evidence, but the entire encounter struck her as an overreach. "Stay focused," she reminded herself. "You have bigger work to do once you land." Little did she know, the true confrontation would come even sooner, and not on her behalf alone, but in a formal capacity that would shake Lena's sense of security to the core. Valerie settled into seat 14B, a comfortable spot in the economy comfort section that offered a bit more legroom. She stowed her carry-on overhead, placing the smaller tote with her documents under the seat in front of her. Usually she would spend pre-flight moments making final phone calls or reading through briefing papers, but today she felt uneasy. She couldn't ignore the nagging sense that Lena's random check had been anything but. Passengers filed past, some grumbling about limited overhead space. A tall man with a baseball cap nearly dropped his duffel bag on a nearby passenger's head, prompting a collective wince. Flight attendants in the aisle, 2 men and 1 woman, besides Lena, assisted with stowing luggage. One flight attendant kindly directed an elderly couple to seats near the front to avoid them climbing over row after row. Meanwhile, Lena hovered at the front of the cabin, double-checking seat assignments on her tablet. She'd done countless flights, but today her nerves felt frayed. She told herself it was just the usual stress, but deep down she sensed that the confrontation at the gate wasn't entirely above board. The way Valerie had looked at her calm, yet searching unsettled her more than an angry outburst ever would. As the cabin door closed and the safety demonstration began, Lena took up her position at the front, demonstrating how to fasten the seatbelt and pointing out the exits. Her voice carried through the cabin speakers, but her usual polished confidence felt forced. She could practically feel Valerie's presence, like a pinpoint of tension radiating from row 14. When the demonstration ended, Lena strolled down the aisle to do a final compliance check. Seatbelts fastened, tray tables up, electronics in airplane mode. Reaching Valerie's row, she gave a terse nod, verifying that everything was in order. Valerie, still polite, returned the nod. As Lena moved on, a short conversation caught her ear. 2 passengers behind Valerie were discussing the random search. "That was messed up," one whispered. She didn't even do that to the guy with the huge backpack. Their quiet murmurs of disapproval were like needles in Lena's psyche. She bristled but continued her walkthrough, determined to maintain her professional facade. Finally, the aircraft taxied onto the runway, engines roaring to life. Valerie closed her eyes momentarily, feeling that familiar surge of adrenaline as the plane lifted off the ground. She was no stranger to constant travel, but she never lost the wonder and mild apprehension of takeoff. Up in the air, the seatbelt sign blinked off. Lena and the other flight attendants began preparing the snack and beverage service. Halfway through the flight, Valerie decided to take advantage of the relatively smooth ride to review some pending audit details. She opened her laptop, scanning a spreadsheet with confidential airline compliance metrics. Little did she realize how soon she would be putting those very metrics to use, and not in the calm, methodical setting of her Washington, D.C. office, but right here at 35,000 feet, in an impromptu showdown that would expose Lena's overreach and force a reckoning neither could have anticipated. The flight cruised at a comfortable altitude as the beverage cart rattled down the aisle. Lena, despite her roiling thoughts, moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency. "Would you like coffee, tea, or water?" For each passenger, she handed over napkins and peanuts or pretzels, forcing a warm smile. When she reached Valerie's row, her eyes flicked over the open laptop. She couldn't decipher the spreadsheet's contents at a glance, but she noted the governmental seal in a corner of one of the documents. Her breath caught in her throat for a split second. It seemed official, federal-level official. She forced her gaze away, completing the beverage service with a taut grin. Valerie simply thanked her, taking a cup of water. She'd decided earlier that she wouldn't publicly challenge Lena's earlier actions unless Lena pushed further. However, the tension hung in the air. Valerie could sense Lena's discomfort, as though the flight attendant knew she'd crossed a line but remained too proud or fearful to address it. A few rows ahead, a woman rang her call button, complaining about motion sickness. Lena busied herself retrieving air sickness bags and ginger ale, relieved to have a distraction. But in the back of her mind, she replayed the gate search. Was I overzealous? She wondered. Could this come back to haunt me? Deep in her spreadsheet, Valerie cross-referenced data points about on-time performance, passenger complaints, and airline compliance with Department of Transportation regulations. She was finalizing details for a surprise inspection scheduled for next month, which would involve a thorough review of training protocols for flight crews. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was dealing with a prime example of potential discrimination at 35,000 feet, while preparing to enforce the same rules that might admonish such conduct. Suddenly, turbulence rattled the plane. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Folks, we're hitting a rough patch. Please remain seated and buckle up. Flight attendants, secure the cabin." Lena quickly stashed the beverage cart in the galley and helped her colleagues ensure the cabin was safe. She noticed a young child crying in the back, frightened by the jostling. Pausing, Lena calmed the little girl with a reassuring pat on the shoulder, handing over a coloring book to distract her. Compassion rippled through her, a reminder that she wasn't all rigidity and suspicion. Yet one misstep could overshadow all her good intentions. As the turbulence subsided, Valerie decided to stretch her legs. She maneuvered to the aisle and walked toward the rear, intending to visit the lavatory. Passing by the galley, she glimpsed Lena cross-referencing flight manifests on a handheld device. Their eyes met, and Lena quickly looked away, as though caught doing something wrong. Returning to her seat, Valerie's phone buzzed with a push notification. "Please review updates for Federal Audit #ATH146 Crew Training Policies," it read. She inhaled, reading the bullet points. The protocol was clear. If a credible claim of potential discrimination or misconduct was observed by an official in the field, an immediate preliminary inspection could be initiated. The realization sank in. This might not wait until next month. We might do it right now. The impetus wasn't just personal. It was mandated by the rules she upheld. And that meant a very different sort of confrontation might take place, possibly even before they touched the ground in Washington. The stage was set for a mid-air collision of authority that could forever alter Lena's fate. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as Flight 1745 leveled off at its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Outside the windows, a vast tapestry of clouds stretched toward the horizon. Within the airplane, passengers settled into their mid-flight routines. Some flipped through magazines, others powered on laptops or tablets, and a few tried to nap through the steady hum of the engines. Overhead bins hummed softly as the circulation system pushed air through the narrow aisles. Valerie Campbell, seated in 14B, had been reviewing a spreadsheet of airline compliance metrics on her laptop. While her professional duties usually took place on the ground conducting audits, reviewing training documents, and interviewing airline staff, she couldn't ignore the fact that something important had happened right here on board. She had been subjected to a so-called random search at the gate, one that felt anything but random. The entire exchange with flight attendant Lena Dawson weighed on her mind. Gazing at the rows of numbers on her screen, Valerie felt a prickle of tension crawl across her shoulders. Official protocol gave her the authority to initiate a preliminary inspection if she personally witnessed any behavior that suggested discriminatory practice. Normally, these evaluations happened after a flight, when she could request airline records and interview staff in a controlled setting. But the memory of Lena's scrutiny at the gate, the pointed questions, the prolonged rummaging through her perfectly compliant carry-on refused to fade. It was precisely the type of scenario Valerie's department had been warning airlines to avoid, a passenger singled out for no obvious reason, with no official alert or system-based directive. She minimized the spreadsheet and opened a set of dot guidelines on her phone. The text glowed softly in the dim cabin. Should a designated official witness potential misconduct, including discriminatory or unsubstantiated screening methods, the official may conduct an immediate on-site inquiry, provided it does not compromise passenger safety or aircraft operations. Valerie read those lines twice, her heartbeat picking up. What had happened to her was not just an inconvenience, it was a possible violation. Yet confronting the matter mid-flight could be delicate. The last thing she wanted was to incite panic among passengers or create a hostile work environment for the crew. Still, she told herself, doing nothing would be wrong. My job is to protect fair treatment for all travelers, not just me. Stealing a quick glance around, she noticed that the father and two children who had witnessed her gate search sat just a few rows behind. They seemed calmer now, one child dozing against the window while the other flipped through a puzzle book. The father looked up occasionally, as though checking to see if Valerie was all right. She offered him a small, polite nod of reassurance. Then she pressed the overhead call button. A few minutes later, another flight attendant, Marilyn, approached with a friendly smile. "Yes, ma'am? How can I assist you?" Valerie leaned forward slightly to keep her voice low. "Could you let Miss Dawson, the flight attendant who performed my gate search, know? I'd like to speak with her privately." "I believe her name is Lena." A flicker of unease passed over Marilyn's features. Her eyes darted to Valerie's laptop, then back to the passenger's face. "Of course," she replied, forcing a professional tone. "I'll check if she's free and let her know right away." As Marilyn moved down the aisle, Valerie sensed a ripple of curiosity from those seated nearby. The overhead call bell was hardly unusual, but the request for a specific flight attendant, especially after a very visible search at the gate, raised eyebrows. Even so, Valerie kept her composure, closing her laptop and sliding it under the seat in front of her. She hoped this could be resolved in a civilized manner. Confrontation was sometimes necessary, but it needn't be inflammatory if handled with care. Toward the front galley, Lena Dawson was busy sorting cups and snack items. Her mind was not on crackers or pretzels, though. It replayed every moment from the gate encounter with Valerie. She recalled how she had zeroed in on the woman simply because she appeared too calm, an excuse that felt weaker the more. She turned it over in her mind. The entire flight so far had been tainted by this uneasy feeling that she had crossed a line. Marilyn's gentle tap on her shoulder jolted her out of her thoughts. "Lena, the passenger from row 14, Miss Campbell, wants to speak with you," Marilyn said quietly. "It's about that search, I'm guessing." An icy knot tightened in Lena's stomach. She swallowed hard. "All right," he replied, voice faint. "I'll go see what she needs." Her footsteps felt heavier than usual as she navigated the aisle. She could sense eyes on her from multiple directions, though perhaps it was just her imagination. Reaching Valerie's row, Lena lowered her voice. "You asked for me, ma'am?" Valerie gave a polite but firm nod. "Yes, my name is Valerie Campbell. I'd appreciate a few minutes of your time in private. Maybe the back galley?" The two exchanged a long, tense look. In that silent moment, Lena understood that this was more than just a passenger complaint. Valerie's calm demeanor radiated authority. She appeared neither confrontational nor frightened, simply resolute. "Sure," Lena managed, gesturing for Valerie to follow. They walked down the aisle together, heading toward the rear of the aircraft. Passengers craned their necks, some with mild interest, others absorbed in their own affairs. Still, the presence of these two women, one in a Delta uniform, the other in business attire, felt charged, as though the entire cabin recognized that something significant was about to unfold. Reaching the back galley, Lena pulled the curtain aside. Metal drawers clanged softly as turbulence jostled the plane. A faint scent of coffee and disinfectant hung in the air. Valerie positioned herself near the edge of the narrow space, arms crossed gently over her chest, her expression neutral but unwavering. Lena took a breath, bracing herself for what would come next. Part of her hoped for a simple apology request, maybe a chance to smooth things over. Another part feared this conversation would unravel into a formal complaint that could jeopardize her career. She tried to steel her nerves, recalling the training courses about de-escalating passenger issues. But this felt different. This wasn't just a frustrated passenger. It was someone who seemed to hold far more power than the average traveler. Valerie met Lena's eyes, her voice steady. "Thank you for meeting me. I think we need to talk about what happened back at gate B32 and why it happened." At that, Lena's heart pounded so loudly she wondered if Valerie could hear it. She nodded mutely, aware that they stood on the threshold of a moment that could reshape both of their professional paths. In the background, the engines droned steadily, carrying them ever forward both literally and metaphorically into a future where the fallout of this tense conversation would soon become all too real. In the narrow rear galley, the sound of clinking ice and beverage cans resonated as the plane hit another mild patch of turbulence. Lena positioned herself near a row of neatly stacked plastic cups, while Valerie stood by the partition, arms folded in a composed but resolute stance. Lena braced herself. "How can I help you, Miss Campbell?" she asked, voice as steady as she could manage. Valerie took a measured breath. "I want to clarify the reason behind the search you performed on me at the gate. I had already passed through TSA screening, and there was nothing unusual about my carry-on. Why was I singled out?" Lena felt heat creeping up her neck. "I was just following security protocols. We do random searches sometimes to ensure random searches," Valerie repeated quietly, "should be genuinely random, not targeted. Do you have documentation showing how these random selections are made?" Caught off guard, Lena stumbled for words. "We pick certain passengers based on timing and, well, gut instinct. Security is no joke, you know." Valerie's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm fully aware security is no joke, Miss Dawson. In fact, My job is to oversee compliance with federal regulations on exactly these kinds of screenings. Lena's face whitened at the mention of compliance. What? What do you mean, your job? She asked carefully. Valerie reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a small leather credential case, flipping it open to reveal her official point, US Department of Transportation ID. I'm a senior investigator assigned to passenger rights and airline conduct. I've been monitoring flight crews as part of an ongoing initiative. Your actions at the gate raised some red flags. For a long moment, Lena couldn't speak. She stared at the credential, throat tightening. Panic and dread mingled in her gut. She glanced around to see if any other crew members could overhear. A wave of claustrophobia pressed in. Valerie continued, her tone calm but firm. The DOT has specific guidelines on how passengers are selected for additional screening. If I find evidence that these guidelines were misapplied, particularly in a discriminatory manner, it can result in serious penalties for the airline and for you personally. Lena managed, her mouth dry. I just thought maybe you had contraband, or you seemed suspicious. Valerie cocked her head. Suspicious in what way? I was sitting quietly, waiting to board, not causing any disturbance. Were there any official alerts on my ticket? Did the system flag me? Lena's silence spoke volumes. She had no answer. No official alert or system flag existed. This was entirely her personal judgment driven, though she struggled to admit it, by an unspoken bias. Valerie let the silence hang before speaking again. Look, Miss Dawson, I'm not here to cause a scene or abuse my authority, but you need to understand the gravity of what you've done. Under the law, selecting passengers for additional scrutiny must follow set guidelines. Free from personal prejudice, Lena's chest felt tight. She stammered, I'm sorry if I... Valerie raised a hand. We can resolve this calmly, but I must conduct a preliminary assessment. I'll need to speak with your lead or the captain if necessary. Are you prepared for that? Panic flared in Lena's eyes. She swallowed hard, realizing how this conversation had escalated into a precarious balancing act. Cooperating might mitigate the fallout, but it also meant admitting to a serious error. The tension in that tiny galley felt suffocating, yet it was only a taste of the reckoning that awaited her in the hours to come. Valerie's statement hung in the air. Outside the galley, the cabin bustled with the mundane hum of in-flight life. Overhead, reading lights switched on. Pages of magazines turned. A baby cried softly in the back row. All the while, a storm brewed within the narrow confines behind the curtain. Lena exhaled shakily, mustering a nod. All right, let me speak with the captain. He'll decide how to proceed. Valerie stepped aside to let Lena pass. The flight attendant hurried down the aisle toward the cockpit, her heart pounding as though she'd run a marathon. She could feel the eyes of curious passengers tracking her movements, likely sensing the tension. Reaching the flight deck, Lena quietly knocked and then slipped in. The captain, a calm, middle-aged man named Captain Reynolds, glanced up from the controls. His co-pilot, First Officer Chang, was busy adjusting navigational details for the cruising altitude. Captain, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's a situation, Lena began. Her voice trembled, betraying her anxiety. She explained the basics, that a passenger claiming to be a senior investigator with the Department of Transportation had questions regarding a random search. Lena had performed. Captain Reynolds listened carefully. He'd flown for Delta for over 20 years and had encountered everything from medical emergencies to unruly passengers. But a mid-flight confrontation with a federal investigator over potential discrimination was new territory. Do we have any reason to doubt her credentials? He asked calmly. Lena hesitated. She showed me an ID, sir. Looked official. I can't confirm or deny its authenticity, but it sure seemed real. The captain exchanged a concerned glance with the first officer. All right, We need to handle this by the book. I'll come back during a stable part of the flight to speak with her. In the meantime, remain professional. Don't do anything to escalate. Understood? Yes, Captain, Lena replied meekly. She felt a mix of relief and dread. At least the responsibility would no longer rest solely on her shoulders. Back in the main cabin, Valerie returned to her seat, noticing the curious looks from her fellow passengers. The father with 2 kids who'd seen the initial confrontation at the gate gave her a subtle thumbs up, as if expressing silent solidarity. Valerie offered a polite smile, mentally preparing for the next step of this process. 15 minutes later, the plane hit a smooth, cruising altitude, and Captain Reynolds emerged. His uniform commanded immediate respect. He discreetly gestured for Valerie to join him in the forward galley, away from the crowd. She obliged, carrying a small notebook and pen tools of her trade. The conversation in the galley was brief but tense. Captain Reynolds introduced himself, respectfully asking to see her credentials. Valerie complied, handing over her ID. He studied it, comparing it to a quick reference in a cockpit binder that listed valid federal agency IDs. Satisfied, he returned it. "Miss Campbell," he said, his voice low but authoritative. "I understand you have concerns about a security screening that was performed. I also understand your official capacity. Let's get clarity on how you'd like to proceed." Valerie outlined her rights according to the DOT protocol. She explained she could either file a preliminary field report upon landing or, if urgent, request statements from crew members immediately. Captain Reynolds looked troubled, scanning the horizon through the open cockpit door. "I'd prefer if we handle any formal statements on the ground for the sake of in-flight operation, but we'll fully cooperate." With that, Valerie nodded. The plan was set. Upon arrival, an immediate meeting with the airline's ground supervisor would take place, and Valerie could formally begin her audit. For Lena, the real test loomed on the runway, where all the justifications and protocols or lack thereof would be laid bare under official scrutiny. For the remainder of the flight, an uneasy calm settled over the cabin. Lena performed her duties mechanically, avoiding eye contact with Valerie whenever she passed row 14. The other flight attendants noticed her uncharacteristic tension, but she deflected their concerned questions with vague answers. Valerie, for her part, closed her laptop and prepared a succinct summary of the incident, along with references to DOT guidelines on random passenger searches. If the airline wanted immediate documentation, she would be ready. She felt that peculiar blend of regret and resolve. She wasn't eager to cause personal harm to a flight attendant, but her duty demanded accountability. Allowing biases in passenger screening would only perpetuate unfair treatment for countless travelers. The seatbelt sign dinged on as the plane began its initial descent into Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. Captain Reynolds made the standard announcements, reminding everyone to stow carry-ons and return to their seats. Outside the windows, the sprawl of the city came into view, with the Potomac River winding around the airport's perimeter. Lena methodically checked seatbelts and tray tables, her face etched with strain. She paused at row 14 for a fraction of a second, meeting Valerie's eyes. This time, Valerie offered a measured nod and acknowledgement. Not necessarily warm, but not overtly hostile either. Lena's stomach flip-flopped, unsure whether that was a sign of condemnation or a gentle reassurance that everything would proceed with fairness. Minutes later, the plane touched down with a soft squeal of tires on the runway. Applause broke out among a small group of passengers, an old tradition that occasionally resurfaces. Lena forced a small smile, though her heart felt heavy. She guided the disembarking process, speaking in muted tones. Once the cabin door opened, the rush to exit began. Valerie patiently waited for the crowd to thin before retrieving her carry-on. She stepped off the aircraft into the jet bridge, where Captain Reynolds and a waiting Delta ground supervisor Mark Levinson stood. He was a tall man in his early 40s, wearing a blazer with the airline's insignia. "Miss Campbell?" Mark asked, extending a hand. "I'm the ground operations supervisor here at Reagan National for Delta Airlines. The captain briefed me on the situation. Could you spare some time to discuss it now?" Valerie shook his hand, steeling herself. "Yes, I can. Thank you for meeting me." A pace behind, Lena emerged, her face flushed and eyes downcast. She offered Mark a weak greeting, unsure if she was being summoned or if she was free to leave. Mark gave her a short nod, indicating she should follow them. Together, they walked down the corridor into a small meeting room reserved for airline staff, away from the public eye. The short journey felt interminable to Lena, each step echoing with the weight of potential disciplinary action. Her mind churned with worst-case scenarios, suspension, termination, or even federal fines. She clung to a thread of hope that honesty might mitigate her fate. For Valerie, this was another day at work, albeit an unusually dramatic one. Yet even she felt the tension coil within, recognizing how high the stakes were for everyone involved. As the door closed behind them, the stage was set for a post-flight reckoning that would leave no room for half-truths or hidden biases. In the small conference room, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a stark glow on the modest wooden table and 4 chairs. A single window looked out onto the bustling tarmac, where planes taxied to and fro. The environment felt almost clinical perfect for the kind of regulatory inquiry that was about to take place. Valerie placed her carry-on by the wall and took a seat, notebook in hand. Lena and Mark sat across from her, while Captain Reynolds stood by the door, arms folded, watching with cautious interest. "Thank you for agreeing to meet so promptly," Valerie began, her tone measured. She reached into her bag and withdrew a thin binder labeled with the Department of Transportation seal. "As I mentioned earlier, I'm Valerie Campbell, Senior Investigator. I'd like to document the events that occurred at Gate B32 in Atlanta. Specifically, how Miss Dawson here selected me for a random search and the rationale behind it." Mark nodded, his expression serious. "We at Delta want to ensure full compliance with DOT standards. We appreciate your cooperation." Valerie glanced at Lena. "Miss Dawson, can you walk me through the process of how you determined I needed a search at the gate? Was there a system-based alert, or was it discretionary on your part?" Lena swallowed, her throat feeling painfully dry. "We do occasionally perform random checks for flight safety," she said softly. I noticed Miss Campbell taking notes at the gate, and it made me suspicious. It seemed unusual for a passenger to be so calm and studious. An uncomfortable silence fell. Lena's own words sounded hollow. She forced herself to continue. "We don't have an official system that notifies us to do these checks. It's more of a judgment call. I honestly believed it could be a security risk." Valerie made a note. "And did you check any other passengers in a similar manner?" Lena shook her head. "No, ma'am." "And how many random searches did you conduct before or after me on that flight?" "None," Lena admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Valerie exchanged a look with Mark, who shifted in his seat, clearly uneasy. "Miss Dawson, do you realize this raises concerns about discriminatory practice? Even unintentional discrimination is a serious matter." Lena's eyes welled with tears. She tried to hold them back, but the stress overwhelmed her. "I didn't mean to profile anyone. I was trying to do my job, I swear." Captain Reynolds stepped forward, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "It's all right, Lena," he murmured, turning to Valerie. "We acknowledge this is a grave concern. Delta enforces strict guidelines about random searches, typically aligned with TSA protocols. This appears to be an isolated instance of error in judgment." Valerie nodded. "I appreciate the airline's stance. For the record, I'm not here to ruin careers, but I must file a report citing this incident. The DOT will likely request additional documentation from Delta regarding its training and policies. Mark frowned, jotting down notes. Certainly, we'll cooperate. Is there anything else we can provide now to assist your inquiry? Valerie closed her binder. If you have the relevant training manuals or a record of Miss Dawson's certification in security procedures, that would be helpful. We'll also need to interview any staff who witnessed the search. A heavy hush followed. Lena stared at the table, tears threatening to spill over. She felt exposed, with her every action on display. Yet she also sensed a faint relief, knowing that if she had to answer for her mistakes, at least it was in front of a professional who aimed for fairness rather than a media circus. Valerie exhaled. This was only the beginning. The official complaint would trigger further inspections that might reach beyond just one flight attendant's decision. Systemic changes could be demanded. But at this moment, she hoped the lesson would resonate with Lena, that vigilance and bias are not the same, and that conflating them could carry dire consequences. The meeting concluded with a tense agreement. Valerie would finalize her preliminary report, and Delta management would conduct an internal review to determine if corrective or disciplinary action was warranted for Lena. Captain Reynolds assured Valerie that the airline valued compliance and fairness, and Mark pledged swift cooperation with any subsequent DOT inquiries. Lena emerged from the room feeling hollow. She wanted to explain how her stress levels that morning had clouded her judgment, how she'd let fear dictate her behavior, but explanations were poor comfort now. The airline she'd served for a decade with pride might penalize her based on a single lapse. Would she lose her job, her pension, her professional reputation? The possibilities haunted her. Valerie, on the other hand, walked away with a heavy heart. She believed in accountability indeed, her role demanded it, but the human toll weighed on her. As an investigator, she'd seen countless instances of staff members bending rules and passenger complaints piling up with no resolution. This time, however, she was personally entangled. She remembered the sympathetic father at the gate, the uneasy glances from other passengers, and the internal voice whispering that this entire debacle might have stemmed from the color of her skin. By the time she reached the arrivals area, her phone buzzed, an email from her immediate supervisor titled Urgent Audit Follow-Up. Opening it, she found a directive to expand her investigation into Delta's training protocols. The top brass at the DOT had already caught wind of her mid-flight encounter and was seizing the moment to push for broader reforms. Valerie rubbed her temples. So, it was official. This wouldn't be just a minor footnote in her next routine audit. It would become a headline issue, a case that might spark additional training programs or policy overhauls. The phrase hard karma flitted through her mind. For Lena, that karma meant potentially facing a disciplinary hearing. For Delta, it meant the cost and scrutiny of a government-initiated compliance crackdown. And for Valerie, it meant more work, more public attention, and perhaps even harassment from those who viewed her actions as overreaching. A few days later, while Valerie was organizing her notes in her DCOFFICE, an official notice from Delta arrived. The airline confirmed that Lena Dawson had been placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. They asked for Valerie's official statement to expedite the matter. She complied, sending the meticulously detailed account of her experience. Within the airline's internal ecosystem, rumors swirled that Lena's case might become an example, a cautionary tale to staff about the consequences of unsubstantiated searches. Some flight attendants sympathized with her, recalling times they'd felt pressured to do something if a passenger seemed off. Others believed she'd crossed a clear line and needed to face the music. Meanwhile, Lena sat at home, phone silent, anxiety gnawing at her. She had no illusions about the severity of the situation. She replayed the conversation in that cramped galley 100 times, each time wishing she'd handled it differently. That was the true weight of hard karma, knowing a single mistake could unravel a career, leaving her to wonder if she'd ever regain the respect she once had in the skies. Weeks turned into a month, and the official DOT audit was in full swing. Valerie led a small team through Delta's training materials, staff interviews, and compliance records. Her interviews revealed many flight attendants were well-meaning but felt ill-prepared to distinguish genuine threats from unconscious biases. The data pointed to a pressing need for better guidelines and more robust diversity training. In a surprising turn, top Delta executives reached out to Valerie and her team, asking for recommendations. They offered to pilot new training modules aimed at preventing discriminatory profiling. If successful, these modules could be rolled out industry-wide. It was a silver lining in a storm of tension, the kind of systemic change Valerie always hoped her investigations would spark. As for Lena Dawson, her disciplinary hearing was swift. Representatives from the airline's Human Resources Department, along with legal counsel, reviewed her case. They considered her decade-long record of good service, the lack of prior complaints, and her willingness to acknowledge she'd acted without proper cause. In the end, they handed down a 6-week suspension without pay, mandating she complete an intensive training program before returning to duty. It wasn't a termination, but it was a stark reprimand. Lena, relieved that she still had a job, accepted the punishment quietly. She recognized she'd been granted a second chance. Friends and family offered support, though not all understood the gravity of her lapse. Some told her she was being scapegoated, but deep down, Lena recognized her error. She'd let fear and prejudice override protocol. Meanwhile, Valerie filed her final report, which documented the entire timeline from the gate confrontation to the post-flight meeting. She also proposed measures to ensure flight attendants had clearer, unbiased guidelines. The DOT lauded her thoroughness and integrity, though the spotlight drew mixed reactions. A few critics accused her of power-tripping, but an equal number praised her for standing up against profiling. In the quiet aftermath, as tension settled, both women found themselves reflecting on the incident's impact. For Valerie, it underscored the real-world value of her work. She wasn't just pushing paper, she was actively shaping a fairer travel experience for everyone. For Lena, it was a wake-up call, a lesson in humility and empathy. If she returned to the skies, she vowed never to let suspicion overshadow respect again. A final twist came when Delta invited Valerie to observe a training session for newly hired flight attendants. She watched from the back as an instructor guided recruits through modules on compliance and cultural sensitivity. Near the end, the instructor referenced a recent example of how stepping outside official procedures could have serious consequences. While no names were mentioned, Valerie sensed the significance of that cautionary tale. Stepping out into the airport corridor afterward, she spotted a lone figure in uniform, Lena, fresh from her suspension, about to rejoin her crew. Their eyes met. Valerie offered a small, respectful nod. Lena nodded back, a touch of gratitude in her gaze. In that fleeting moment, both recognized the power of second chances and the possibility that even painful lessons could pave the way for better skies ahead. Thank you for joining us on this emotional ride, where one flight attendant's ill-judged random search collided with a seasoned federal investigator's quiet resolve. Lena Dawson's hasty judgment cost her both dignity and hard-earned respect, proving that bias, intentional or not, can disrupt lives and trigger serious repercussions. Meanwhile, Valerie Campbell stepped beyond her routine audits to protect not just her own rights, but the fairness every traveler deserves. Their confrontation sparked a domino effect, from disciplinary action to airline-wide reforms, and a renewed commitment to unbiased service. If you found this story thought-provoking, please hit the like button, share it with friends, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping tales that shine a light on social issues, personal growth, and the power of standing up against injustice. Your support means we can continue creating content that sparks conversations and inspires change. Safe travels, and see you in the next story.